What is up, everybody? Welcome into Chris and Company. I am Chris Castellani. This is episode 16 of Chris and Company. So yeah, this show is coming out on a Friday. I like to have them up earlier in the week, but we had a few reschedulings, and then we had a dear boy, a great guest, courteous guest, came from the clouds. That is Foolish Baseball, Bailey, aka Foolish Baseball. I DM'd him on Thursday morning. We ended up doing an interview on Thursday afternoon. He is one of the biggest baseball YouTubers, one of my favorites. I did interview him way back when I was doing Locked On Tigers in 2021, right before I got hired by Barstool. So time is I guess time is a flat circle. We talk about that in the interview. Really appreciate him being courteous. It was a lot of fun. It was a really good interview. I'm excited for you guys to listen to that. But before we get on with the interview, just want to say, if you're watching this on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Let's get those watch hours up. If you're on Apple Podcasts, if you're on Spotify, sorry, just got a text. Oh, Spencer Torkelson struck out with runners in scoring position. What else is new? Okay, anyway, moving on. I don't know. Maybe you guys heard that alert. Maybe you didn't. Apple Podcasts, no time. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, like, subscribe, leave a review, and continue to spread the word and support Chris and Company. I'm proud of this product that we're putting out. And now I think that we're at a point where we've got a good baseline here, but I don't want this show, and I'm happy to interview Detroit sports personalities until the end of time. It's great. But what I want this show to be is just me interviewing people that I find interesting. It doesn't matter if it's the guy who, hands you your coffee at Dunkin' Donuts, or if it's, Timothy Chalamet. As long as I find them interesting and feel like I can ask them good questions, that's all that really matters to me. So I want to try to mix it up. We have a pretty good assortment of guests coming. Obviously, we have a content creator today in Bailey. I don't want to give away who's next, but we have one comedian and one former basketball player / motivational speaker that's going to be joining the program. Now, of course, we will continue with Tigers talk and stuff like that. You don't have to worry. But like I said, I just want to mix it up a little bit. All right. I think that's all for the social media plugs and all the fixings. Guys, thank you so much for continuing to support. I'm really excited for y'all to listen to this interview, so let's jump right into it. Here's my interview with Foolish Baseball. Chris and Company, episode 16. We follow up our interview with Tigers reliever Jason Foley. Another brilliant baseball mind comes our way. Appreciate him doing this on short notice, by the way. Bailey, a.k.a. Foolish Baseball, baseball YouTuber sensation. Is that too strong of a term?
It may be too light of a term. I would say superstar.
That's fair. Fine. Superstar, enigma, unicorn, sensation, whatever positive affirmations or superlatives we want to use. This is my second time interviewing you. Last time was when I was doing Locked On Tigers. So just before Spencer Turnbull's no-hitter, that kind of started all of this. But I appreciate you doing this, man. It's good to have you back. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Yeah, it's full circle, isn't it? Right? Like, I got you right at the beginning of something big for you, and now you've got this new thing with the show. And I've been following some of your guests, and I saw you had like Tarek Skubal. So I'm excited to be the Anco for today.
Thank you, man. Well, I look forward to our next interview in 2027. Obviously,
right,
that will be a lot of fun. Hopefully, I'll be at a different point in my life by then. But I want to I take pride in the research that I do. And I like doing something of a deep dive. And I'm going to start you off with a question that I'm willing to venture you have not been asked before. Bailey, do you know German?
I do know German. That is absolutely correct. I lived in Germany for a year after I graduated college. I've not spoken it regularly since I got back, so I'm not very good, but I can certainly watch German TV shows, especially if there's with the German subtitles, and read books and stuff like that. The speaking is not so good. My pronunciation was always quite bad, but yes, I know German. I could speak to a German person right now at like a third grade level.
And were you capable then at that point in your life of maybe working for a German baseball team?
This is correct. Yes.
Yeah.
If you'll have really done your research if you have any idea what baseball team that is.
Well, I mean, it's the Hamburg Steelers, obviously.
That is correct.
Yeah. If you could, man, because I did not know that about you at all. I mean, I know you're such a brilliant baseball mind. But could you talk about your experiences, like what you were involved with in terms of how you worked with that team and what you did exactly?
Yeah, I was, and I didn't work for them. I did kind of the equivalent of like a free internship.
Okay.
Basically, the reason I was in Germany was it was part of an exchange program. So it's an exchange program that sends 75 young professionals to Germany, and then 75 Germans come to the United States. And part of the program's stipulations are that you work was basically the equivalent to an internship, which is called a practicum. So I basically hopped on with the baseball team because I couldn't think of anything else to do. I tried to apply for more traditional jobs, and I was basically just a volunteer social media person. It was not glamorous. I was not involved in baseball ops or anything like that,
Right.
but I did some social media stuff for teams in Hamburg, and I also my bigger claim to fame is probably I would run the audio on game days, so like walk-up songs and stuff like that, and like I think I did the scoreboard too, so I was like up there in the booth doing all that. We had on the Steelers, we had I think he was our center fielder. He was a Swedish guy named Pontus, and at the insistence of everyone in Europe, they insisted that Pontus, because he was Swedish, would have to walk up to ABBA. So his walk-up music was ABBA's "Take a Chance on Me," and I had like, good control of like the volume or whatever, and whatever volume I was playing all the other songs at, they wanted me to basically double it whenever the ABBA came on. And I tell you what, everyone would clap and sing along because I mean it's ABBA, man. So that's my biggest memories of German baseball probably is that everyone likes ABBA.
Fair, and that's interesting to me because we know so much, obviously, about American baseball, and I think we've learned over the last, with the WBC, especially, just kind of what the vibe is like when it comes to Japanese baseball, baseball down, in South America. Is there any difference between how baseball is played in Germany versus how it's played in America?
Yeah, I mean, they're not professionals. They're maybe semi-pro at best. We had what I guess would be the equivalent of like the foreign players in NPB or KBO, where we had three Americans we could have on the roster, and they were basically invited to play in exchange for like a stipend and rooming and housing. But most of them, like a lot of the guys who played, worked day jobs or didn't really have aspirations to play, baseball at a higher level, like let's say affiliated ball in the United States or anything like that. But yeah, they were doing it for the love of the game. And, there's some good players. When I was around there, the big news, the big buzz was that there was this pitcher named Marcus Solbach, who is German, who had been signed by the Dodgers out of the German Bundesliga for baseball. So that was exciting. And obviously Kepler was starting to really make a name for himself as well as sort of the German baseball player, so that was exciting as well. So there was some excitement in the German baseball scene. And the other thing too is Regensburg, which is in Bavaria, which is not where I was at all. It is sort of the European capital of baseball. That's where a lot of like, if you're a Team USA youngster or something like that, and you're playing for, your U17 or whatever, you're probably going to go to Regensburg at some point. So there is interest in baseball in Germany.
I was going to say Kepler's probably like their Ohtani there. He's probably their number one. They probably got him on billboards and everything. That is a fascinating part of your story, man. And moving on now to kind of, the realm of what you do, the baseball, the video essays I've been following since, for so long, even well before I ever interviewed you. And one video I wanted to hone in on was where you went in depth about the pitching at Colorado, or in some ways the lack thereof, because that to me is, I have a text exchange with my buddy where we talk about this. In my opinion, that is the hardest organization in sports to win with, because you have a disadvantage that just doesn't exist anywhere else. And your knowledge of why certain pitchers fail, most pitchers kind of fail there. I thought you went so in depth. I found it fascinating. Do you have long-term aspirations to be somebody who works in a baseball organization?
Well, it's funny. I was just in Chicago, and I was visiting Wrigley. I'd never been to Wrigley before. And I met up with Jeremy Frank, who is someone who had a career start kind of similar to mine. He's younger than me, but we were both like public baseball content creator type people. myself on YouTube, him on like Twitter, and then he wrote a book of all his MLB random stats. And so he's been working for the Cubs now, and we had I talked with him about his job, and when he described his job to me, I thought, I couldn't possibly do that. That's not for me. Like, it's a good thing that I'm an entertainer and I'm in the public space and I, can, just make people laugh without taking myself seriously as like a legitimate baseball mind. And then he proceeded to describe for me a job that they do have at the Cubs. Then I was like, oh yeah, I could totally do that. You know what I mean? So I think, I'm quite content with what I'm doing. I'm in love with the independence of it all, being able to sort of set my own hours. And I mean, you reached out to me like an hour and a half ago to do this. And I said, You know what? I've got time. I'll hop on with Chris. So it's tough to trade that for anything else. But, I am jealous of front office people because they know things that I don't know and they have access to things that I don't have access to. And, there is a curiosity there of what it's like on the other side. But I think what happens is if you go to the other side, you don't come back.
Yeah, and it probably get overwhelming too. And I've even asked players and managers about that. Like, does the amount of information that we have access to nowadays, can that be overwhelming with certain guys where it's like, I want to just go out there, see the ball, hit ball, or I just want to go out there and pitch. I find that, kind of to be an interesting dynamic. But I think, you bring up being an entertainer, and you are. I mean, you're a funny guy. I've always been fascinated by your videos. But I think, the thing that I always come away from watching your videos is that I feel like, I've learned something. And I remember when I was interviewing you 3 years ago, before I was about to, I told my parents, I'm like, hey, I'm about to interview this YouTuber. He's really good, and you should check out. And I sent him the Verlander video because you're a family of Tiger fans, and that was kind of the first video of yours that really popped off. And my dad was like, yeah, it's pretty interesting. That was pretty good. And my mom was like, he was talking too fast. I didn't understand what he was talking about. Are you ever concerned that maybe like in your attempt to try to blend the entertainment with the analysis that maybe you're almost too smart for the common man?
No, yeah, I don't think so. That's not a concern of mine. I mean, I think in general, people are tired of sports media that treats them like they're dumb, And so I don't feel any sort of like guilt or feel like I'm missing out on anything by creating something for someone who is at least a little bit familiar with baseball and a little bit familiar with the numbers, and it's not overly sensationalized either. So no, I don't really fear that. What I do fear is actually keeping the videos entertaining while still keeping that educational perspective, because the people who, YouTube and online content increasingly, and I'm not saying this like I'm above this, like I'm one of these people too, is for the ADHD, need all the stimulation type brain. And I have to keep the video stimulating, which means sometimes moving at a hectic pace, explaining some of these concepts. But I also don't want to mislead anyone. So that's the balance I try to strike, is how can I make this video entertaining and keep the flow going and keep the energy going while also taking my time to explain the more complicated things, to a thorough enough degree.
Yeah, and there's a lot of evidence that supports the point you're making that, like, I think I read somewhere that the average, like, watcher of an internet video decides within 10 seconds if they're going to continue. Well, that's why these, TikTok is so popular, is you could just scroll through, 10 to, 1 minute long videos and just kind of decide. So I feel like that there is that balance there where you do have a lot to explain. In order for the video to be coherent, you do have to explain it. But at the same time, you still have to worry about, making sure it's entertaining and funny. There's a lot of baseball stuff that I wanted to ask you about. Some of it you've addressed in your videos and tweets, and some you haven't. And I, obviously, being a guy who talks all the time about the Tigers, and I do my videos on the Tigers, and a huge frustration that has existed within the organization for a long time has been the player development in terms of position players. The Tigers have not had a homegrown player finish in the top 10 in MVP voting, homegrown position player finish in the top 10 since Alan Trammell. And so I'm just going to ask you, if you could explain to me, because I want to know the answer to it as well, in layman's terms, why is it that some organizations are so successful and good at developing young skill position players while some other organizations struggle as much as they do?
I think part of it is it starts at the draft, and the teams that are good at developing, they know what elements they're good at developing, and they know what elements they aren't good at developing. And so they can target players that aren't just a fit in terms of, oh, great, we could use some speed at the big league level or something like that. But they are able to, maybe they've had past player development successes and they think that they can mimic them again with another player. I think you see this a lot in like pitching development, right? Like the Mariners. A lot of, sweepers and splitters being added to the Mariners because they know that's what works and they know that they're capable of doing that. And so I really think it starts at the draft. You're not just trying to choose the best player available. You're trying to choose the type of player that you can develop into a big leaguer, because you don't really ever draft anyone that's big league ready with a few exceptions.
That's a really good point. It's funny in hindsight. One of the picks that was very controversial for the Tigers several years back was when they took Jackson Jobe over Marcelo Mayer. And at the time, given the track record of first high school pitchers taken, a lot of people were concerned. I was concerned. Now, right now, we got a long ways to go, but Jackson Jobe looks great. And I think one of the biggest reasons why they went with that pick was the Tigers have such a longer history of developing pitchers than they do hitters. I mean, right now, we've reached a point, he's had a good game as of the time we're recording this, but where the jury is still very much out on Spencer Torkelson, kind of trending downwards. I mean, this was a guy who 4 years ago was guaranteed. There were Teixeira comparisons and people talking about him being this generational bat. When a player, and I'm curious about this, when a player doesn't develop, a guy who Mickey Moniak with the Phillies, I know the Phillies had a long run of poor draft picks, but just, when a team has, or when a team has a certain guy that just doesn't develop that they believe is going to be one of their cornerstone pieces, is it more so usually to do with the organization or more so to do with the player?
Yeah, I mean, the organization is ultimately responsible for the player, but I think a lot of times it can be lack of cohesion within the organization, because I imagine if you're, Torkelson's a good example of this, you're moving up different levels of the minor leagues, it's possible that you're getting conflicting feedback, and if the organization isn't cohesive with its philosophy in terms of what it's trying to do with hitting, that can lead to information overload, right? Yeah. So, I don't work for the Tigers. I don't know what the inner workings of it is. I actually still really like Torkelson. I want to,
man. Castellanos was very similar with the batted ball data is always good. It's always good with him, but the inconsistency is killer, man. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's one example of how things could be difficult for even someone as talented as Torkelson coming out of college, who was, close-ish to a big league ready bat as soon as he was drafted anyways.
Yeah, I also think, and the data is still kind of out on this, the COVID year draft, as well as just basically the year of development that was cut off from everyone, I just think didn't do anybody any favors. That's a year of development. Torkelson had one minor league season because of that. He did not have any legitimate at-bats outside of the taxi squad during the COVID year. I mean, that's the killer, even if it is just a couple months.
We'll see how it looks in the long term, but I was actually looking through that draft, and it's weirdly specific because this does happen in other drafts. The third round of that draft has produced absolutely nothing at the big league level for anybody. And, usually by now you have something from those earlier rounds. So it's definitely interesting. I think that 2020 year probably favored players who were in positions where they could be self-reliant and self-sustaining. And then for players who relied on the infrastructure provided to them by their organization, they fell behind. And a recent draftee would be an example of the latter.
Yeah, and it was weird because at the time, Tigers were actually lauded for that draft because they got Torkelson, they got Dylan Dingler and Trey Cruz, and the one that has, he hasn't done much at the major league level, but the one that so far ascended through the system the quickest was, I think, their last pick. It was Cole Keith was their 5th round pick, who's now in the major leagues, got an extension before he even played a game. Now, one of the big issues, and I asked Jason Foley about this a little bit last week, but I want to get your input on it because it's a real conundrum, not just in baseball, but I find it to be one of the more fascinating conundrums in sports, and that's the arm injuries that pitchers are experiencing right now. Obviously, it's become something of an epidemic with, velocity and spin rates being higher than they've ever been. with that has come, I mean, a ton of pitching injuries. I would argue the Tigers were bizarrely ahead of their time with that, where Mize and Skubal and Manning like all kind of experienced this stuff, several years back before it really became a huge deal. I'm just curious from your perspective, is this something that is fixable, or are these arm injuries, as long as pitchers are going to throw this hard and spin the ball this well, just something that teams are going to have to continue to deal with?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's fixable at the big league level, because I think it starts at the youth level.
Mm-hmm.
What's being prioritized in order for, even a 10 or 11-year-old or a high schooler is that velocity, right? So what already is being prioritized at the youth level is what's happening is, by the time a lot of these guys are drafted or making the big leagues, they are what's referred to as a ticking time bomb in terms of their elbows, which is a really sad thing to think about, that this could be, that we're in the middle of what is basically a lost generation of pitchers to some degree. And that's sort of like a harrowing, sobering look at it. That's not to say that the league itself can't do anything, but like when you read stories, like a good example I feel is Yuri Perez with the Marlins, right? They did everything, they did everything you're supposed to do. They babied him. They were in a playoff. They were in a hunt for a playoff spot last year, and they did not lean on him any more than they needed to. And he's in the same place as the guys who you would say are victims of overuse, if anything. So I think it probably starts at the youth level. But the fact of the matter is, these guys are throwing 95 or 100, and the ligament itself is not able to withstand that. I think and another thing is that this is probably pertains to Foley. The types of, it's the pitch modeling and the way people are going after stuff and swing and miss, that is sustainable for one inning. If you're a 1 inning guy, like, you can do that. But that has trickled down to where we need that same level of stuff and swing and miss for guys who throw 4, 5, 6, 7 innings in appearance. And that is not sustainable, So that's a big problem with it too, is that it used to be only relievers had to do these things, and now everyone has to do these things. And if you're throwing 100 pitches a game, it's a lot of wear and tear.
Yeah, I remember, and he'd won 2 Cy Youngs already, but I remember DeGrom, the start he got off to in 2021, where it felt like every inning felt like the 9th inning when you bring in your hard throwing closer. It's 102 every single fastball. And as amazing as it was, yeah, it's so difficult because you're not going to tell these guys, hey, lessen your stuff. Like, you're going to tell them to throw hard. You're going to tell them to spin the ball. But yeah, it's the only injury, Tommy John specifically, is the only injury in sports I can think of that's become this bizarre rite of passage where, like, Paul Skeens, I watched him at LSU. I had the pleasure of watching him in Omaha for a College World Series. Amazing arm, like generational arm. But I also know, like, it's not meant to be any knock against him. I just know how these things work. I felt the same way with Mize. When Mize got drafted, everyone said, look, he throws that splitter. He's got that elbow action. He's got to put a lot of pressure on that ligament. And ultimately, the Tigers did, much like what you brought up with Yuri Perez, they did everything right. Monitored the innings, limited them in 2021, built them up. Sometimes it just doesn't matter. And sometimes it's just about genetics, too. How can somebody explain somebody like a Justin Verlander going as long as he did without having to deal with any significant arm injuries? You just never. And
he still had it. He still. It was when he was way older, but he's supposed to be the picture of the workhorse starting pitcher of this generation. He still had Tommy John eventually. Yeah. He was just able to come back from it at a advanced age that we hadn't really quite seen before. The other thing too is like this argument, and I'm no biomechanics expert by any means, but this argument, the starting pitchers, they need to just take a little bit off. They need to throw a little bit softer. Well, that's kind of hard for me to square away too, because if you're throwing as hard as your body allows, that means your movement is really efficient, And so in a way you're asking them to be inefficient, which is contrary to, everything they're trying to do as athletes. The guys I actually really admire in some way are the ones who are good at energy allocation. So maybe they throw harder with runners in scoring position, or maybe they throw harder in a 2-strike count. Like, I think that's the skill that pitchers need. And Verlander certainly had that. Cause I mean, the whole thesis of my video that went viral and started this whole thing was this guy starts off the game and he's throwing, 94, 95, 96. And then when it's time to unload the tank, he really unloads the tank,
Verlander isn't the greatest pitcher ever, but he's the greatest pitcher ever at that. At those, dude, I can't tell you. It wasn't just stuff. It was how many starts of. I'm at 2 innings in, he's throwing 50 pitches, and then it's 7th inning, and he's pumping 99, 100, or even with the Astros near the when he won the Cy Young a few years ago, he's still throwing 99. It was I know you would prefer somebody work like that. At the same time, that's such a unique case for first ballot Hall of Famers. Going to be 3,000 strikeout, 200 win guy potentially. We're kind of in the show. It's kind of Shohei Ohtani's world, and we're living in it at this point. I feel like in terms of baseball, we talked for so long. Who's the face of baseball? Okay, they've got it. It's Ohtani. It's clearly Ohtani. And as great as he is, I'm very interested in what his influence will be in terms of the two-way player, because in my opinion, and I could be wrong, in my opinion, I just view Shohei Ohtani as a unicorn who will just stand out over time. But there are certain teams, and there's that guy at Florida who the other day hit that 500-foot home run, certain people who believe that two-way players are more a way of the future. Do you think that's true, or do you think Ohtani is simply just an outlier?
I think there is space for two-way players, but I don't think they'll be like Ohtani. Ohtani is an ace pitcher as a starter, and he is seriously over the last 1 year and first few weeks of the season making a case for being the best hitter in Major League Baseball. So you're not going to find a guy who does both. Well, the role that a two-way player might have would be, a guy who could be a platoon bat, but also throw 40 low leverage innings out of the bullpen or something like that. But it's really hard for me to picture another Ohtani because, as you said, he is that unicorn. Not only have we managed to find a two-way player in Major League Baseball that was able to sustain it for 3 years, mind you, but is also one of the very best at both pitching and hitting. That is really hard to come by and hard to picture in the future.
It's impossible to come by. And even when Ohtani was signed, I remember I was still in college at Central Michigan. I remember thinking this will not work. My honest thought was he's either going to end up being a very good hitter or a very good pitcher. He's not going to end up being both. And what I didn't want it to become a sideshow where okay, he's hitting and yes, he's pitching, but his ERA is 5 and he's relatively ineffective. That would have done nothing for me. You could just find a replacement level pitcher. The fact that he was, like you said, a top 10, I'm probably lowballing it, top 10 hitter and top 15 pitcher for about a 3-year stretch is insane. And even, I remember the Rays had Brendan McKay a few years back that they were super high on, who they were kind of thinking about making a two-way player. It's so difficult, not just in terms of skill set, but just durability. You're basically taking care of two different bodies, two different skill sets. So it'd be a unique thing to see, but I'm kind of with you. Like I said earlier, the last time I interviewed you was 2021. Not only has a lot of things changed for us personally, but so much has changed in the game of baseball. I'm just kind of curious, we started to see the rumblings of it during the COVID year, but are you a fan of the new rules? Have you accepted the new rules? Where are you kind of at with them?
I love pitch clock, and what's funny is has been blamed by some for the rise in elbow and arm injuries. I don't really believe it. But what I will say, it's certainly not helping. Yeah. So at best, it's a neutral. Yeah, I love pitch clock. The bigger bases. I guess I'm pro that still. I enjoy the increase in stolen bases. And I was curious to see actually this year if there would be another leap in stolen bases. And the answer is there hasn't been. So it seems like the league kind of found the level of steals for now. It maybe needs more because the success rate dating back to last year is at about 80%. And I think that's too high. I would like to see the league steal enough so that success rate goes down to maybe 75%. More steals at the cost of efficiency. And then the shift ban, I'm unmoved. But I mean, overall, I think those rule changes were great, but the pitch clock is clearly the star of the show. I mean, the other two are way less relevant to me.
All of them besides the pitch clock, I either range from liking to just kind of being indifferent about. The pitch clock to me is, I would argue, maybe the biggest rule change in sports since the shot clock in basketball. I mean, the way that these games are moving and the way that these games are now managed and played, the other stuff, I like the pickoff rule just because pickoffs in general were always an annoying thing to me as a fan. My follow-up to that, though, and I'm curious, a solid decade there, Bailey. Like speed was something that was okay. If a guy's got it, cool, but we don't value the stolen base anymore unless you're a member of the 2014 or 15 Royals. In that case, sure, go ahead and swipe bags. But besides that, we value power. We still do. We value guys who get on base. We still do. But do you think that the new rules may change how players are evaluated with stuff like stolen bases being more prevalent than they've been in the last couple decades?
Yeah, I certainly think so, and I think that that's especially with regards to controlling the run game from a defensive perspective. How is your pitcher out of the stretch? Does he get the ball to the catcher in time? How's your catcher's pop time? Like these are factors that are becoming more and more important because some catchers, maybe you're good at framing, maybe you're good at calling a nice clean game for your pitcher, but with the wrong combo of pitcher and catcher, you can get absolutely bullied out there on the base pass in today's game. And you're going to be allowing, 5, 6, 7 steals a game in some cases. So I think that's ultimately where the adjustment is. There have always been fast major league players. There have always been players capable of stealing a base. But now I think there's going to be a renewed interest in, a catcher who can control the run game and pitcher who can do the same.
Yeah, and it's as far as guys on the base paths, like as one of my favorite players is Corbin Carroll. Just love Corbin Carroll. I would argue his value, without the Diamondbacks even knowing it after they gave him that extension, instantly went up with how often he can swipe bags and what he can do on the base paths. I don't have any evidence of this necessarily, but I have a theory that one of the reasons why the Tigers went with Max Clark over Wyatt Langford in the draft last year was they saw more tools that could help Max Clark in regards to the new rules being thing where with Wyatt Langford, it's just, you got the bat and that's kind of, that's kind of it. Not to say that I wouldn't have taken him, but still, I think that went into part of it. Are you a fan of the strike zone challenge system? Because I'm curious your answer about this, just to give people a little background. You love poor offensive, great pitch framing catchers. They're one of your things. You did a whole video on Jeff Mathis. Dude, every team kind of needs one. Like I think Tucker Barnhart is becoming like the new version of that, where I can't believe he's still in the league. Like he didn't hit I think he hit one home run with us, still kind of bouncing around from team to team. Do you welcome that potential change, or will you lament the possibility of maybe losing out on that era of guys who are just on the team because they're really good pitch framers and game callers?
I will lament it, but I think I have to accept it at this point because it's trickling up through the minor leagues. It's gonna, hit Major League Baseball soon enough. It is inevitable that there will be a ball strike challenge system. And I guess I have to accept it because the alternative is a full ABS system where the umpire really has no role other than to report what the computer says in terms of calling balls and strikes. And I think the challenge system, people like that because it represents a compromise between what we have now and a full, ABS. Umpire has no role in calling balls and strikes. I do think there is certainly something to be said for hitting the spot, right? Your catcher puts down the glove, you hit the spot because, you've seen the clips, I'm sure, coming out of the minor leagues. There's a lot of times where you miss the spot entirely and you throw a pitch. It
doesn't look like a strike.
Yeah, you throw a pitch that does not look like a strike, but it is by the rules. And so, they're able to get a challenge off, or they're able to, or maybe if there's fully automatic ball strike system, it calls it a strike to the shock and dismay of everyone in the stadium. Right. My thing is, and this goes for whenever you introduce any sort of instant replay review in any sport, is how will it affect the tension of the game? Because there's a finality to whenever an umpire calls strike 3 in today's game. You throw strike 3, let's say it's a nice backdoor sinker or something like that. And when the umpire does the motion and says, you're out, you're out. That's it. If it's the bottom of the ninth, 2 outs, that's the end of the game. And, you see in football right now, oh, great, someone scored a touchdown. I hope there wasn't offensive pass interference. I hope there wasn't holding. Someone just made a great interception. I hope they weren't, called for like holding on the line of scrimmage.
Or the ball didn't hit the ground. I mean, they're reviewing the catches a million times, all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you enjoy those moments. You say, hey, this is great. My team just got a touchdown. My team just got an interception. But you can never quite fully enjoy them as soon as they happen because of the fear of a flag and a replay review and something that really slows the game down. And I don't necessarily want that for baseball. I don't want I want to be able to celebrate the game-ending strikeout, and not think, oh no, the batter just tapped his helmet and now there's 5 seconds and I'm going to see the graphic on screen and then I'll finally know if the game is over. Soccer, great example of this. Your team just scored a goal. Was it onsides? Was it offsides? We got to do the VAR and it's going to take 3 minutes. So yeah, I guess I'm a skeptic of any sort of automatic ball strike system, whether it be a limited challenge system or the full thing, and then part of it is because I enjoy those defensive catchers and because the art of framing would especially be lost if it was a full system. And I think because I enjoy the flow of the game and I love the finality of if the umpire says you're out, you're out.
It's great points all around. And even you posted a video that was a perfect example, the final out of the World Series last year, where Josh Spores threw breaking ball at 85 as the top of the zone. Perfect pitch, but like close enough where I could totally see them dogpiling on the mound. Meanwhile, they're checking the Jumbotron, checking New York to see if it was a legit call. Yeah, it could be strange. I think it's a good compromise, the challenge system, because you bring up stuff like finality of baseball. That's a great point. But I also I don't want to lose umpires. I like the charm of umpires at a baseball game. I think it would be weird to just have the entire thing be robotic. So I think in a system, and I don't know how much you follow this, that it's similar to, from what I've seen, is the challenge system in tennis with Hawkeye, where you can challenge it. Now, there are a lot of tennis skeptics that don't like Hawkeye too, even players. But in general, it's a pretty foolproof system that works fast, and even the fans can kind of get into it. So yeah, I'm for it for sure. And that leads me to kind of the guy who's responsible for a lot of this, and that's Rob Manfred, right? And it's so weird how, my biggest issue with him was just the labor negotiations and how long they went on. And I figured he'd be more pro owner, but now that that's out of the way and baseball is at a point where the games are moving faster and he's implemented all of these new rules that have helped increase attendance and have made the games go by quicker. Has your opinion of him changed over the last few years?
No, I mean, he's still the same guy, but what has been a weakness for him in the past is actually turning into a positive, which the fact of the matter is Rob Manfred doesn't really like baseball all that much. And in labor negotiations, he was not thinking as a steward of the game. He was thinking as a stooge for the owners. He was not thinking, hey, if we miss time or, let's think back in 2020, right? Like baseball had a chance to come back a lot earlier and it could have been the only thing on TV. Me. And it wasn't because of what happened in negotiations between the owners and the players, and with Rob Manfred standing in the middle, kind of. So the fact of the matter is Rob Manfred doesn't care about baseball. Now the plus side for that is, he can go put in a pitch clock when there's never been a clock for 150 years. He can change the size of the bases when that never gets changed. And because he doesn't really care about baseball and all he cares about is making sure the league makes money and making sure fans are watching. The fact of the matter is those changes have worked, right? And I think those changes have made the game a better product on the field, but they're all coming from the same place, which is that Rob Manfred doesn't really care about baseball. Rob Manfred cares about dollars and cents for his bosses, the owners. And, in labor negotiations, that comes out in a really ugly way. And when it comes to improving the product on the field, that can be a positive thing.
For sure. Yeah, it's another good point. Yeah, that because I kind of feel that way too, where there was a time where I just loathed that whole process, especially 2020. And I'll ask you about that in a second. But I do over the last few, it might be on accident, but the changes that he's made, I've really enjoyed in a lot of ways, have made the game a lot better and more accessible. And I brought up the COVID year, and you did as well. I'm so fascinated by that stretch. I mean, beyond just baseball, I mean, we're still kind of waiting for the data to come out about what were the right decisions and what wasn't. I'm not going to ask you about all that, but in terms of how you evaluated that season, even the players I've talked to kind of said it was just bizarre. I mean, did you take anything out of that year? Do you view it as a legitimate year in which you could evaluate players, or was it kind of a free for all the way that a lot of people suggested?
Well, what's funny about it is I think from the fan perspective, the number one reason people talk about 2020 is because the Dodgers won the World Series.
Yes, that's a really good point. Yes.
And it's the only World Series they've won, even though they've been dominant for the last 15 years. It's the only World Series they've won since '88, and a lot of people don't think it's legit. Basically, I actually think the playoffs were probably the most legit part of the entire season. They had to go through another round of playoffs. Everything was like very neutral site. Like, a lot of the finickiness of the regular season was kind of ironed out in the playoffs. So that at the end, when we got to Dodgers versus Rays, we felt like, oh yeah, these are the two best teams in 2020, whatever that means. But as far as the season itself, I mean, it's so funny to look at sometimes. Like, look at Dom Smith, then of the Mets. Look at what he did that year, and then the rest of his career. And then at the same time, sometimes players and teams were previewing in smaller samples what became sustainable for them later on in 2021, 2022, 2023, and beyond. I think a great example of that is Devin Williams. Devin Williams came up. Had like a .33 ERA in like 20 innings, astronomically low FIP. And, 20 innings isn't a huge sample, but he followed that up by being one of the best relievers in baseball over the last 3 years, So there are some things that were real and there are some things that weren't real from that season. But now that we're like a few years removed from it, I think it's nice to sort of look back and see, that was just a bunch of noise. And no, that actually meant something.
It's a case-by-case basis, because you look at the guys who won the major awards, like, okay, yeah, Freddie Freeman's a great player. Like, Freddie Freeman's a guy in a 162-game season, very capable of winning an MVP. Jose Abreu is similar. I think it probably could have gone to Jose Ramirez, to be honest, that year. But you
totally should have gone to Jose Ramirez, by the way.
Yeah, it should have. But either way, like, still a great player, perennial all-star player. But you look around, across the league, still, it's like JD Martinez was terrible that year. And to a point where there were people that were concerned the next season, like, has he hit a wall, and immediately put up like an all-star campaign. I just think it was such a weird time for so many people that it's, when you're going through Baseball Reference, it's almost like you have to kind of not only look over that, but I also feel like there were some weird situations in the early part of 2021 that were kind of enigmas as well, like Yerman Mercedes and guys like that. Like, I just feel like baseball didn't really return to being baseball till like maybe the late spring, early summer months of 21. Continuing with kind of just talking about, you brought up the playoffs, and last year, obviously, one of the more bizarre playoffs we've seen. Diamondbacks, Rangers making it to the World Series, two teams nobody really expected. I'm just curious, now that we're 10% of the way into the Major League season, who do you think is a team that maybe not a lot of people are talking about that you could see being this year's Diamondbacks or even this year's Rangers, a team that wasn't a playoff team a year ago that could make some noise this year?
I've got my eye on that NL Central, and I'm going to say the Pirates for right now. They're off to another good start. They're off to a good start last year, too. Yeah. We all remember what happened. But overall, it's going to come down to their young pitching. Jared Jones looks like an absolute sensation. Right. I mean, I cannot say enough good things about the level that he is pitching at. That even, and they're monitoring his workload because he's a young pitcher. But that he had a game against the Mets like 2 days ago, 59 pitches, 50 of them strikes. Like, that's absolutely unheard of. And you look at some of the pitch modeling, his stuff is completely out of this world. And they have Skeens on the way, and Bubba Chandler could factor into them. I'm a big fan of Bubba Chandler, so I don't know if it'll be this year for them, but if they have some of those young guys start to really hit, and O'Neal Cruz has had a bad start to the season, but there's no reason why he can't, play at a really high level the rest of the way here, and that division being wide open. I think the Pirates are an interesting one. They've at the very least improved their outlook from opening day quite a bit, just by getting off to a very solid start. Padres is our team I'm definitely keeping an eye on. I think everyone's kind of forgetting that even though they were bad in terms of their win-loss record last year, they had such a bizarre year in terms of the sequencing of their hitting. And Josh Hader was their closer, and they had an awful record in one-run games, which does not compute either.
With Hader having a great year.
Like, and Hader had a great year.
He had an all-star season. Yeah.
Yeah. And their rotation is sneaky. Their rotation is sneaky, one of the better ones in the league right now. Matt Waldron, who is their fifth starter, who is the only one who's not like super name brand value, he looks really good. And he's a knuckleballer, and that's a lot of fun to watch too. But King they traded for, Cease they traded for. They have Musgrove. Darvish, I think, is on the IL right now, but we know what he is at this point in his career. He's a good pitcher. And there's enough depth in that lineup, even without Soto, that they're interesting. Jackson Merrill off to a great start to his career. I think things are going to improve for them when Machado is able to play third base more consistently, because then they'll be able to get a better bat there in terms of DH. They won't have to worry about having Tyler Wade in the lineup every day necessarily. So I'm excited about the Padres and the Pirates, and I'll go ahead and choose an American League team real quick here. I'm going to say I am at the very least intrigued by what the Kansas City Royals are doing. I'm Twins all the way in this division, even though they're off to a dreadful start. I know this is mostly for Tigers fans, so Tigers fans cover your ears right now. Before the season started, I was like, everyone's hyping up the Tigers and the Royals, and I don't care. This is the Twins division, and if anyone's going to challenge them for it, it's just going to be the Guardians again. The Royals, I don't know if this is still true, but as of 2 days ago, they had the best run differential in the entire league. That's pretty incredible. It's just, for me, it's a question of, I knew their lineup had some good depth to it. It's can this rotation hold up, because they have guys who are good on a per inning basis, but are they going to give enough volume, and is everyone going to be able to stay healthy?
Yeah. And I mean, I would say for them to win that division, they need 170, 180 innings out of Cole Ragans, who's basically who's great, but is basically in his first full season at the big leagues. Can you rely on that? I've started to come around on them. I still think long-term, I think their bullpen fails them. I think that could end up really doing them. And I don't really believe in the back end of their pen. Really glad you brought up the Padres, because I would say last year's Padres were the most bizarre season maybe ever. I mean, when you look at the years that those guys, you get a Cy Young year out of Snell. You get Tatis moves to right field and wins a Platinum Glove. Nobody talks about that. He was elite out in right field. You had great years, and it's just that they weren't clutch. I agree with you where I could see them surprising people, because I think that was a 100-win team disguised as an 81-win team, that I could see kind of things evening out and they get back to that 90-win range again this year. I loved the Cease trade. I have a theory that White Sox core that people thought was going to, myself included, was going to tear through the Central for several years. They're going to all go to other teams and be great. I think it's just I think it's just a White Sox thing with that. And he finished second for the Cy Young a few years back, but still I like that 1-2 punch in the front of the rotation with him and Musgrove. On the other side of things, who's a team that you think has maybe kind of been in the thick of things for a while that you think might be closer to rebuilding than some people believe?
I guess Cardinals. Cardinals came into this year. I don't know what the attitude of the fans or the sports books or the prognosticators was necessarily, but the idea I had was, it seems like if you polled 100 people who know baseball, who's going to win the NL Central this year, the majority of them would have ended up choosing either the Cubs or the Cardinals. That's the way I see it. And the Cardinals, they're 9-10 right now. It's still very early days. They're only 3 games off of first place, which is the Brewers. But I just don't like where they're at in terms of the way they've developed some of these players. I don't know if Mason Wynn and Jordan Walker, as talented as they are going to give them the value on field in 2024 that they were really hoping they could get. Some of these, they bought innings for cheap to fill out their rotation, which made sense in theory. We'll see how it goes in practice. I think the Lance Lynn signing is going to work for them, funnily enough, because it's the lowest investment. But the Sonny Gray and the Kyle Gibson, we'll see how that ends up in terms of value. Sonny Gray obviously hurt to start the season, a big loss for them. But I don't like where this Cardinals team is at all. They've got aging Arenado, aging Goldschmidt, neither of whom are off to a good start this season after they already took a step back last season from what they did in 2022. So I think the Cardinals' long-term outlook is tough, because you could count on them no matter what, even if they didn't have a highly touted farm system. They were going to call up a Tommy Edman type player in June, and that was going to save their season. And I'm looking around at what it's been like for them the last few years, and I haven't seen any of those surprise players. And then you see the Mason Wynns and the Jordan Walkers, with sort of inauspicious starts to their careers in some regards. So I don't like. I think the Cardinals are losing their juice and their devil magic, basically.
I agree with you. Yeah, because they last year, there seemed to be, maybe because they are the Cardinals, this belief that it was an anomaly season for them. And in some ways, sure. But I think in general, the way that they go about developing their pitching like needs a reset. I think they're trying to develop a generation of Adam Wainwrights in a game where Adam Wainwrights probably just aren't going to exist much longer. They didn't miss a ton of bats with their starting pitching. And I think and look, Arenado and Goldschmidt, as much as I love them, I think they're both Hall of Famers, not getting any younger. So yeah, I could see that them being a team that has a decision to make. One other team, and I think you've talked about it before, that just as a maybe, because for so long we've looked at them as this jumpstart young team, but they aren't so young anymore as Toronto. I think with the East getting better, by the day, the Yankees are off to a great start. Baltimore, I still like in that division a lot. The Rays are going to be a pest. Boston's obviously trending downward, but they'll find their footing in a few years here. For several years, all we talked about was, hey man, they got this young core, and I mean, outside of maybe Bichette, none of them have really lived up to the hype. That we've seen it in bits and pieces, but watching Gausman in the early part of the season, I know he was better in his last start. Like, that's a potential arm I could see being one where it's like, yeah, this is a guy that we can move at the deadline, because not only have they not made any deep runs, they haven't come close. I mean, they haven't won a playoff game yet, and they've tried to spend their money. They tried to go all out on Ohtani. So it's kind of a weird. That's one team that I would look out for in that division. Speaking of them, though, I just want to I'm not going to ask for insider knowledge, but the ballad of Alec Manoah is one of the strangest things that I've seen in baseball in a long time. In your opinion, is it the pitch clock? Like, is he the biggest victim of the pitch clock? Because he lost everything. The plane on his slider was gone. What happened there?
Yeah, well, I will start by saying when he was really good in 2022, he was getting pretty lucky by a lot of the metrics. I mean, his ERA was, I'm guessing, low twos. If you look at a lot of his ERA estimator type stats, they were pushing more towards 4. But I mean, you're right in that the fall off, as the kids on Twitter say, will be studied. I'm actually curious to see. I'm trying to look up his pace, his pitch tempo from previous years to see if was he particularly slow on the mound compared to the league average starting pitcher. Back in 2022 before pitch clock, because that could be an indicator to some degree. I'm gonna actually bring that up right now. Let's see, Manoah. He was one of the slower pitchers in baseball. He was at 20.7 seconds between pitches. That's actually not the way the timer works. The timer works when you get the ball back and then the clock starts, but it has a timer equivalent here of 14.7 seconds. As we know, the timer is less than that, but if your average is 14.7, then you're probably taking, more than 18 seconds or more than 20 seconds, at least for some individual pitches. I don't really think it's a pitch clock thing. This happens, it's a little bit unheard of, but yes, young pitchers will have a great season and then come out and just suck, it's probably more a mental thing for him, if anything. What I'm curious is if the Blue Jays have mismanaged him in any way, or feel like they've mismanaged him in any way, because at least for me as an outsider on surface level, this is one of the best pitching teams in the league, with or without him. And they've been able to identify talent and develop talent. And, they got a great season out of Manoah before the bad thing happened. They signed Kikuchi, who was never really all that great or consistent with the Mariners, and he's off to a great start for them this year. And Gausman, they were able to basically repeat San Francisco's success with him over and over and over and over again. So
they revived Barrios last year after he had that bad year.
Barrios had a great year. Bassett's great for them. So and Barrios, by the way, looks good again this year. So I don't know. He is absolutely perplexing to me. I think it's just for me at the very least, it's a clear case of change of scenery needed.
Yeah. Bizarre story though. We talk obviously so much about baseball, but I'm just curious to kind of get to know my guests outside of what you do in the content world and the baseball stuff. What are your other hobbies? What do you like to do outside of this?
I like to walk around. I like to pace a lot.
You and me both. Okay.
I pace a lot of time. I like to pace around in the woods and just be with my thoughts. That's one of my number one hobbies. Even like last year, I almost every day, if I was home working on videos, I would just take an hour out of the day to go walk around the woods. Some people call that hiking. For me, it's more of a pondering. It's more about the mental than what's happening physically in terms of moving my body. I've always had an interest in comedy, of course. I mean, I think that kind of comes through in the videos. I did a little bit of like stand-up open mic stuff before I became a YouTube superstar, as I said previously. And thankfully, my audience is able to, well, I mean, they're captive in the sense they're forced to listen to my jokes, but I'm able to at least have that creative outlet, so I don't feel the need to do that anymore. But yeah, that's me. I basically walk in the woods and I try to make people laugh. Those are my hobbies.
Who are your favorite comedians?
Ooh, that's a good one. Let's do like a Mount Rushmore, because that feels like a very like bro-y kind of like podcast thing to do. My Mount Rushmore of stand-up comedians. I'm gonna go Wanda Sykes, definitely one of my favorites. Oh, okay. Very funny lady. I'll start with her, and then I'll go. Man, this is tough. I like Mark Normand a lot right now.
Me too.
Mark Normand, and then let's go like more like classic, like old school comedians. I'll say Richard Pryor, and I'll say this guy's like very much a comedian. He was like big in like the 80s, but like Richard Janney was like a really big comedian. And then I think he's just like one of the great like joke writers.
Yeah, good picks, man. That's interesting, because obviously, I mean, I've talked to people, whether it be people that worked at Barstool or beyond, who I consider very funny. You're in that camp, and it's interesting how some view like comedy as this thing you study, and they watch old specials, and they're familiar with the world of comedy, and some are just like, I just find it's just a thing I do. So that's an interesting kind of side quest. I think that's very cool. Two more questions here. Who is in this whirlwind that you've been going through over the last 5-6 years with the YouTube world, and you've gone to the winter meetings, and you've met some pretty crazy people, who's the coolest person that you've had the opportunity to meet in the time in which you've been making content?
Ooh, I've enjoyed my interactions with Spencer Strider. He is, at least among players, he is an odd duck. He is an odd fellow. He does not, like, when I was in high school and when I was in college, and even with a lot of my interactions with professional baseball players now, you get used to sort of like what a stereotypical baseball player is like and how they behave and how they conduct themselves. And he is a subversion of that in many ways. This is a guy who has like very clear interests outside the game of baseball. He's a very eloquent speaker and thinker. And it's been a privilege to at least get to know him some over the last few years, because he's been a big supporter of what I do before he was even a big name for the Braves at the major league level. So it means a lot to me to have him as, in terms of at least like my relationship with players, as like one of my closer contacts. And then just like around the league and let's say other media people or stuff like that, because honestly, when I started doing baseball, it's not like, I don't know, like I'm very impressed by baseball players and their athletic feats. And I do believe that they're all better than us, right? I do believe that Shohei Ohtani is better than me in every way, but I don't, at least at my age, I don't look up to them, like I don't, it's just more of an appreciation for what they do. I don't think that's what I'll be when I grow up. Like my time has come and passed to do that. But the people I do admire now are the people who are, great baseball writers or great people who do, podcasts or blogs or, the type of analytical type blogs that inspired me to start the channel in the first place. So at least in sort of like the public facing baseball world, like some of my closest friends, probably the Cespedes barbecue guys, I think we're pretty similar. We're programmed similarly, at least in terms of how much we enjoy baseball. Getting to know Jeff Passan's been cool. Let's think who else. I want to shout out one other person. Kofi from SB Nation. Very much in the vein of like trying to look at sports oddities and make it big in terms of video content creation. Like those are the types of people who I've really enjoyed getting to know, who I otherwise wouldn't have gotten to know if I was just someone who simply viewed and enjoyed or read their content. But now, because I am, Bailey from Foolish Baseball, I get to be friends with these people.
It's a unique perspective that you bring up about talking to the players, because I remember when I talked to Tarek Skubal, I remember feeling, and this is a bizarre emotion for me, comfortable. Because I was just like, at the end of the day, I'm just like, he's a 20-something that loves baseball. I'm a 20-something that loves baseball. Now, he actually plays it at a very, very high rate. But it's weird because, like, behind me, for people who are watching this on YouTube, is the picture of Trey Burke's shot against Kansas when Michigan played in the NCAA tournament. Like, Trey Burke, if I was interviewing him, like, be going nuts. Like, because when I was in high school watching Trey Burke and he was in college, that was like my God. Now it's just like there's more of a level playing field, which I think is the proper way to kind of deal with this stuff. It makes things less awkward. Last question. I think one of the cool things about these interviews and one of these cool things about so many content creators is that everyone has a unique story. And I know that you, prior to this, you were working in a homeless shelter. If you could, in the modern age, 2024 Bailey, if you could give homeless shelter employee Bailey one piece of advice, what would it be?
Man, I would say just do something, because I think that is the advice I would give to me in that situation. That's the advice I'd give to anyone who was, hoping to, break through and because this was the dream, right? To some degree, right? Like when I was going through high school and college, I couldn't imagine that I would become a baseball YouTuber, but I could imagine becoming a sports writer. I could imagine, my pie in the sky dream job being something involving baseball or sports. And the advice I would give to me, the homeless shelter, and to anyone out there would be, you have to prove that you can do the job before you do the job. And that's really tough nowadays. You have to, like this is a good example, Chris, like, you couldn't just go to any podcast network and say, hey, I think I'd be really good at hosting a podcast. You just have to start doing it, and then opportunities will open up to you. You couldn't just say, I think I'd be really good at interviewing Tarek Skubal, so let me just try to interview Tarek Skubal. You had to like build up a network of contacts and become like somebody in the Detroit sports scene in order to be able to get to that point. And for me, it was, I had to not just do YouTube. I'd started YouTube at the time, but I had to do something. In this case, it was do something different, and instead of making videos about out of the park baseball, really just try to apply everything I know about baseball and create a really entertaining video. And that's how I started making, this baseball bits series anyways. So, if you're in college out there and, you're have an interest in baseball or sports or, any sort of creative pursuit, like you have to do it, and you probably have to do it for free, and you'll do it for free because you love it. And that's how YouTube was for me. I did it as a hobby. I didn't have any expectations to make a career out of it. And yet here I am, 5 years later, and I'm still here, baby. I'm still doing it.
Well, it's been awesome to see you grow. I mean, this isn't meant to take shots at anybody else that I've recorded with, but this is one of the most fun baseball discussions I've had in a long time, man. It's you're knowledgeable as hell. People follow him, Foolish Baseball on YouTube. I'll link to all your socials as well so people can make sure to give you all the support. But man, we'll do it again at some point, but for the time 2027, like I said, but at some point, but for right now, man, thank you so much for doing this, especially on short notice, and wish you all the best, buddy.
All right. Thanks, Chris.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much to Bailey for jumping on. That was so much fun. That was awesome. And I mean, like, I'm happy with all these interviews, but I just did two bros sitting down talking ball for like an hour. I loved it. Fascinating guy, intelligent guy. I mean, that's the takeaway with so many of these interviews. There's a lot of smart people out there in the world. I mean, I'm technically part of the same species as some of these guys, and yet they seem very much above me. But Bailey was great. Love the interaction. Love the back and forth. He's had a heck of a story. And if you haven't watched his videos, I recommend doing it. It's pretty rare to say this, but there is really nobody that I can compare to Bailey on YouTube in terms of his production, the way he analyzes things, and just the overall presentation of his videos. Really fascinating and interesting. I recommend you guys follow all his stuff. Not that he needs my plug. He's doing way better than I am at this point, but I'm happy to see that he's continued to grow. He's awesome. So thank you very much, Jim, for joining. If you're watching this on YouTube and are still here, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Let's get those watch hours up. I think I forgot to mention as well that you can hit that bell notification. That way, every time I upload a video, the world will let you know. It'll be sent directly to your phone or to your tablet or to your laptop, and you can get Chris all the time. And speaking of Chris all the time, you can find Chris and Company on Spotify. You can find it on Apple Podcasts. Continue to spread the word. I believe in this product. Shout out to Austin as well, who continues to have the quick turnaround with everything he's putting together in terms of the production. This show does not run without his help. So yeah, shout out Austin Sisler. My Twitter is at Castellani2014. You can follow me there for all my weird random thoughts and Tiger videos. We will be back next week. I'm not exactly sure of what day. It should be middle of the week in which these will be posted. And over time, I want to have more of a consistent uploading schedule. But as I've said before, the guests are doing me a favor by being on my show. The least I can do is work around their schedule. So appreciate all of you for continuing to support during what has been a pretty wild time. But this show has centered me for sure. This has been a very wonderful outlet. So appreciate all of you. Continue to spread the word and subscribe. I will see y'all next week. Have a great rest of your day. Peace and happiness. Go get 'em, Tiger.